Hello everyone, my name's Hannah Collison from Inspired Creations, Surrey School of Sugarcraft, and today is all about piping with buttercream, learning how to pipe blossoms and roses. So here's the kit list. So if you'd like to join in, then go ahead and get these items ready. The 450 grams of buttercream is split as follows. Cream or pink, 150 grams. Purple or pink, 150 grams, and 100 grams of green. And this is the piece that we're going to be learning how to make. It's just on a 6-inch round board, and it's roses, rosebuds, blossoms, and foliage. I'm recording. So I'm going to, the coupler itself has a screwy bit. We take the screwy bit off and keep the funnel. This is actually going to be inserted into the plastic piping bag. Okay, so I'm going to push it in all the way. So if you know what you're doing here, you can go ahead and follow me with this. If not, just watch the first one and then you'll know what you're doing. On the end of the coupler, there's actually a cutout bit here, which is like a U shape. And we're going to score against that whilst it's in the bag. And as I score that line, I can then push. I've just realized as well, if it goes blurred, I will notice that because I've got you on screen, so I'll just reset so it's clear. Okay, push the coupler out of the way, and then where I've scored, I'm just going to cut straight across with my pair of scissors and push the coupler in. And because I scored at the bottom of the U here, that's how far I can push it through the bag. Now, if you are cutting it just a little bit more, just avoid cutting it more than a couple of threadle lines in, because if you cut it really deeply up here, when you have to apply some pressure to pipe, you might find that the coupler itself will shoot out of the bag. So this first one is going to have my number 12 or 18, which is a bit brighter. If you haven't got all the piping tips, don't worry, just tell me in a minute and I'll see how we need to adjust. This bag is superbly long. So I'm actually going to trim a little bit off the end. I buy my bags in bigger because they're more usable for other things when I want to load the bag up, maybe with cupcake mixture. And they're a bit cheaper as well. So that's how you prepare the bags. The next cup bag is going to have either one of these in. So I'm going to put my 104 in. If you've got just a 102, put your 102 in. And if you've got both, put the bigger one in first. And then my final piping bag is going to have a leaf tip. So it's either going to be the ST51 or the slightly bigger one, ST352. Okay, and if you've got them both, I would put the bigger one in. All right, so that's the first thing. So if you want to do your bag prep with me now, and I'm just going to feel free. Okay, so what we've got, you've got some maybe uncolored buttercream, or you've possibly got a purple and a green. Okay, so I've got my three colors here. If you start off with the uncolored buttercream and just give that a bit of a stir in the pot, because what we need to do is just check the consistency. You can see at the moment well, this has been made last night, but I need to kind of mash it to soften it a bit, because this is far too stiff to go into my piping bag. Now, with the warmth of the room and a little bit of mashing, this may well become soft enough. If it is, then I don't need to warm it up. If it was too stiff, then I would need to just give it a very, very, very light warm up, either for maybe 2 seconds on the lowest setting in your microwave, or it could be that I need to, if you haven't got a microwave, you can use like a bain-marie and just warm the bottom of the pot momentarily in some warm water, and just give it a good stir to incorporate that warmth within the pot. So this at the moment, if I try and pipe with this, it's just going to be a nightmare. It's going to be really, really difficult. So I'm just giving it a nice press down just to try and warm it up a little bit. And if I have to, I'll go to my microwave. So to soften it, you heat very slightly, and to stiffen it, you put it in the fridge. So once your recipe's mixed, I never add more icing sugar or water. Okay, and that's just so that the balance of the recipe doesn't get thrown out, because if it's watery and then it gets warm, it'll go slushy, and if you add too much icing sugar to it, then it'll just go dry and crumbly. It's like a workout for the bingo rings this morning. Part of me saying it'll be all right, because of course as soon as we start to press and hold this bag, the warmth of our hands is going to soften it up as well, so you don't want it too soft in the first place. Okay, the reason I'm kind of knocking it back or mashing it against the pot is to squish out all the air bubbles, because when you make freshly made buttercream, it's not overly smooth, it's very pitted and aerated, so you do need to squish all that air out. So it needs to look like, and probably feel like, super fine, like the bestest mashed potato you've ever made, the smoothest, butteriest mashed potato. That's kind of the consistency and the look that you should have on that. Okay, so I'm just going to give that a couple more twists of the knife, and then I'm going to load it onto a piece of cling film. So if you've done the buttercream classes with me before, you'll already know this. But I've just got like an oblong or a square of buttercream, enough to be able to accommodate 150 grams of white. You don't need any more than that. And we're just going to drop that onto the sheet, onto the cling film. Okay, you can have a little sausage shape of buttercream going on here. Now, the reason we use cling film is because it's a much cleaner load up for your bag. It means that when you've used it all up, you can actually just make up another batch and pop it straight into the bag, having removed the spent supply. Yeah, so it's all round, it's just so much more convenient. Okay, so once you've got that onto the cling film, you can go ahead and close up by just bringing the two ends of cling film together and just start to fold that top edge down. It doesn't matter if you lock some air in, because we're going to cut this in a moment. Okay, and mine's a little bit cool, but I think the warmth of my hand is probably going to help me with that. Okay, so that's the white, and then you'd go ahead and, or if this might be pink or purple for you, you'd then go ahead and prep your purple, or your pink and purple, and your green. Okay, so prep all your bags in the same way. Okay, so once we've got our bags into cling film, we're going to chop off one end on each of these 3 bags, and we're going to load up the piping tip that's a number 12 or 18, so it's the big open hole. I'm going to put on my white, which is the one I want to pipe my roses with. Okay, so if you've got a particular colour that you'd like to make your roses, that is the bag you want to load up. You drop the cling film buttercream into the bag, and then just kind of give it a little downward drop so that it comes to the end. Okay, the green is going to go onto the 352. Okay, so the green is going to go onto 352, which is the leaf. Again, just kind of drop it down in the bag. Sorry if that's coming on the microphone rather loud. And then my remaining colour is going to be on this petal tip, because we're going to start by we're going to use that petal tip to make blossoms to start, and tug it down to the bottom of the bag. And if you've got a bag tie, then you can go ahead and drop that behind the bag, stretch it so that you can then put the loop over the tab and squish that down to the bottom where so that all the buttercream's nice and down the bottom. If you haven't got one of these ties, use a sandwich clip. If you haven't got a sandwich clip, you don't actually need to seal the bag. It should be okay. You just need to make sure that your hand is tightly in place so that it doesn't squidge out. The cling film wrap should help that as well. So if you go ahead and just get your bags, your buttercream loaded into your bags. If you've got long bags like mine and you've got a huge long tail at the end, then you can chop a little bit of that off, but don't shorten it too much. Make sure you've got at least the bag length as your tail end, because I want to hold the bag in a particular way. Okay, so that's all 3 colours loaded now. So with the number 18, I'm going to make the cones for the roses. If you haven't got a flower nail, you can actually use an upturned wine glass or something that's just got a flat bottom that you can turn round. Somebody used a wine glass last night and the stem was fantastic because it's kind of the equivalent to this. Just don't get the crystal glass out just in case it breaks. So I need to squeeze just a little bit of buttercream onto the flower nail. Let me just show you how to hold the bag first, that would help. So I want to make sure that all my buttercream is nice and scooched down. Put where just below the freezer bag into the crease of your hand here. And then take the tail of the bag and wrap it around your pointing finger and bring that back in between your finger and your thumb. Give it a little twist round. That makes the bag really nice and plump and stops you from having to press too hard and hurting your wrist. Okay. And just make sure all the time that your piping bag is nice and plump, and you should have no problem at all with squeezing out. So I've got a little bit of buttercream on here. And what I now need to do is just turn that upside down to pick up my little piece of paper. Okay. Now, I'll show you how to get a little guide mark on this at the moment. I'm just going to show you how to get this on because some of you might already know how to do this. I'm going to hover my number 18 or 12 piping tip about 3 millimeters away from the surface of my nail, and it's perpendicular, so it's 90 degrees. If you're holding it, your bag is facing the floor. Okay, so it's nice and upright, but I'm just holding this at an angle so you can see. So we make contact, squeeze out, don't raise the piping tip. So you're squeezing out to get the bulb size. Piping tips in the buttercream, and then I keep squeezing, but I very, 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 very slowly start to come up. And when I think my cone is big enough, I relax the pressure and I come off upwards, so you end up with a fat cone with a peak, and it's got a nice angle to it. Okay, now how tall do you need to make this cone? The piping tip that you're going to use for your roses, whichever one it is, 102, 104, whichever one that looks a little bit like this, it's 1.5 times the length of the petal shape. Okay, 1.5 times. This piece now can be pulled off, and that's going to go onto a tray into the fridge, but we're going to make 5 of these. Now, if you're not sure how big the initial bulb needs to be, you can take yourself a pencil and just any piping tip, any of the small piping tips, and if you want to, you can draw around it just roughly, so you've got a bit of a circle. If I've still got enough buttercream on here to glue, and if I put that face down on the drawn side, it means then that my pencil will not be on my creation. So that will then give you a rough guide on how big that the bulb needs to be in the first place. Okay, so again, hold your bag as I showed you, hover about 3 mil above, squeeze, make contact, keep squeezing. Get the bulb size. Now I'm still keeping my pressure, but I'm now very slowly traveling upwards. Relax the pressure when you think you've got the height, and then come off upwards to create your cone. So we just want something a bit like this. Okay, and we need 5. So this is the 104, and the fat end on the 104 whatever you're doing, whether you're piping blossoms or if you're piping roses, the fat end is always downmost or dug in, okay? The thin end will give you the outer petal edge. So if you're not getting thin petal edges and you're getting fat petal edges, you've got this upside down, okay? So fat end is always down. That's one thing to remember on this piping bag. When you're piping with it, there is also an angle to consider. So we're going to have the fat end always down, okay? And the bag angle, so the bag angle here to the surface is pretty much always 45. And then you've got one more angle to consider, and that is the angle of the tip. So you can have the tip upright, that will give you an upright petal. You can have it at 45 degrees, and that will give you a slightly upright petal. And you can have it dead flat on the surface, so horizontal, and that will give you a really flat petal. And I'm just going to show you with the squiggle, a frill, just to show you what I mean. So bag is 45 degrees. And this time my fat end is down, but my narrow end is upright, facing the ceiling. And if I do that, if I squeeze out, you can see that my thin edge is upright. If I now subsequently turn this at let's go really flat, in between as well, you need to just clean off so you've got a clean starting point. So fat end is going to be on the surface, but actually the whole thing is going to be resting on the surface flat. If I do that, I get a very flat finish. A fat edge, a thin edge. And then if you want to have it slightly raised, then what you would do is tilt it so you've got a slight angle so that you have like a 45-degree angle here. Fat end again down, and you get this effect. Okay, so you've got an upright, a very flat, and a slightly lifted. So this one is what we're trying for. Okay, that's the 45-degree bag angle, and the nozzle is pointing at 45 degrees as well. So with the fat end down, what I'm going to get you to do is just practice some petals on here, just so that you realize that you don't have to create much movement to get these. It is a completely different feel on the flower nail, and you'll probably find it easier once you get onto the flower nail. But for the moment, all I want you to do is practice on your surface, on your board, on your table. Okay, my finger is going to be like an underline. You know when you learn how to write and you draw a pencil underline and you write onto that underline, just so that you've got like a straight set of words. This is what I'm trying to do with my fingers. So my finger is going to be my initial guide, and my piping tip is going to start off at a bit of an angle here. My fat end is down on the surface, and I'm going to squeeze, and like a windscreen wiper, I'm just going to pivot just a little bit, relax the pressure, and then come off. So I have a 45-degree angle here and a 45-degree angle on my piping tip. It's not up, it's not flat, it's in the middle. My finger is my full stop, my anchor point, and I'm just going to pivot on my finger and come off. So start, pivot, relax the pressure, wobble just a little bit and come off. Fingers your starting point. Squeeze, turn, come off. Squeeze, pivot, come off. Just practice that for a moment for me until we start to see that we've actually got our piping tip the right angle and you can understand what you're trying to create. Okay, so these are petals. It is easier on your piping now, but just for the moment it's a good idea to practice. Okay, so to make a blossom, I initially need a little bit of glue on my flower nail. Press your piece of paper onto the flower nail, okay? Now, if it helps you, haven't got a marking on there, and I will show you with a marking, you can actually give yourself a bit of a guide. So if you start off with a pencil and put a center dot, and then just draw randomly, it doesn't matter how even this is, 5 lines, okay? A bit like the spokes of an umbrella. And then if you stick that one face down, you haven't got the pencil marks onto your buttercream, okay? So that gives you a little bit of a guide as to how much, what size petals, how much buttercream to pipe and when to start and when to stop. And we're going to do a 5-petal blossom flower. So again, hold your bag how I've described, nice and tight and plump so that you're in control and you haven't got to squeeze too hard. Just clean off the piping tip each time you pipe so that you know that you're not going to get a messy petal. The fat end, if you remember, has got to go face down. It's going face down in the center. And what we're going to do is start by lining up the angle of the bag on one line, and we're going to squeeze and pipe to the next line and then come off. Now you'll notice that it is my piping bag. If you just look at my bag for a moment, it will be squeeze, turn, stop squeezing, pull off. The only time that that bag moves is when I come off. So your nail is doing all the work, but I'm not really turning. It's only a squeeze, make contact, turn a little bit, stop when you get to the next line, release the pressure, come off into the center. Fat end down into the middle again, underneath this petal. Line it up with the line, squeeze, move, relax the pressure, come off. So my bag is not moving, it's stationary. The only time it moves is when I want to come off. So fat end into the center, squeeze, turn the nail, relax the pressure and come off. And then I've got my last one. Now my last one, I'm going to need to kind of turn my piping tip up a little bit as I get to this side, because of course I don't want to crash into the first petal. So fat end in towards the center, possibly not touching the surface at this point, and then you squeeze in that last petal, move the nail a little bit, relax the pressure and then come off, and you've got yourself a little blossom. Okay, now I'm going to redem that. This, I use my piece of paper that hasn't got a marking on there if you want. If you don't want to be dictated to, then you can just have a little center dot. Okay, and that will help just allow you to know where your fat end of the piping tip starts. Imagine where your petal edge is going to be. Position the piping tip, 45-degree angle here, 45-degree angle here. Okay, can you see that? Hopefully. So squeeze, make contact, turn, stop squeezing, come off. The turn is not dramatic either. It's only like a 10-minute turn on a clock. It's not a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes or a whole circle or a semicircle. Fat end into the center, squeeze, make contact. It's gone under the petal. Relax the pressure, come off. Go under the petal, fat end down in the center, squeeze, turn, relax the pressure, come off. Last one, squeeze. This time I can't set the tip down. I've got to hover. Relax the pressure and gently come off into the middle. As you come off into the center, but don't flick because you might end up breaking one of the petals you've just created. Okay, so have a go. I think we should do 5 big ones and then maybe change onto your other color. I'm going to change onto my cream, and I'm going to do 5 small ones, all the same process. And I'm going to work alongside now as well. So if you want to follow what I'm doing, then you can just have a little look. So the small blossom is the same. Just make sure your piping bag has got, it's nice and tight. All the buttercream is scooched down to the bottom near the tip. So this 102 now is giving me a really nice little petal. And really, you know, sometimes it's going to be down to the piping tips that you've got and what you want. But it is quite nice to have a variation in sizes if you can. You might not be able to. But these, once they're stored in the freezer, you can actually store them in there. Once they're frozen, you could gently pack them together in a Tupperware box, and potentially they could stay there for a month, certainly a couple of weeks. So if you're short of time, then you can make them all in advance. And if you put them in royal icing, once they're dry, you could actually store them in a tin and they would last for ages, absolutely ages. Okay, so to create the centers, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off by changing my piping tip from my white. So it doesn't matter, you just need to choose a different color from the color of the flower. I've got my number 2 piping tip, so that's just going to go onto my white. That's where these couplers come into their own, because you can change up the tubes as many times as you like. Scoot all the buttercream down to the bottom, give it a good old twist to tighten the bag, and then make it so that the buttercream comes out of the tip end. And then holding the piping tip 90 degrees, so literally facing the floor, squeeze, but keep the piping tip nozzle end in the blob. Okay, relax the pressure and then come off. And by keeping the piping tip nozzle end in your little pearl, you will end up with something that hasn't got a point in it. Okay, if you do get a peak, that's okay. You just need to get a slightly dampened brush, and you'll be able to just dab the top end with the brush, and that will flatten it a little bit. Okay, so you can have them peaked as well if you wanted to, but you want to build the blob up a little bit, and then you gradually, like you did the cones, you gradually, whilst still pressing, draw up. So you could create stamens like this. So one set of flowers could have lifted petals, lifted centers, and the others could have slightly flatter ones. So maybe I'll do lifted ones in here. I'll just do a couple or 3 in here. So we can start by squeezing and drawing up. Do it slowly, because if you come up too fast, you'll find that it will possibly tear. Okay, if I just show you that on the side, then you can see what I've tried to create. It's a little raised center. Okay, and I'll just show you one more of those. So position, keep piping as you draw up, squeeze and draw up, squeeze and draw up, and then clean the piping tip, ready for the next one. Okay, they're quite nice. So just you could then just put a little pearl in the center of the small ones. So if you can do that for me when you're ready, I'll carry on and do mine. Okay, so the rose, I've got the 104 that I've changed back onto the bag that I was using before, which has got my cream buttercream in it. Again, scoop all the buttercream down to the bottom of the bag. Make sure that this part of the tip is nice and clean. Put a little bit of buttercream onto the nail and put your set cone back on there. You can pipe without refrigerating the cone, but I find it quite difficult. So, a couple of things to note on here. The fat end is always going to be down, okay, almost embedded into the cone. So the fat end is the lower part of my piping tip. I changed the angle so that it's going to follow the outline of, so it's following the angle of the cone itself, okay. So I start by squeezing quite firmly. So the fat end is making contact with the lower part of the cone, and I'm piping out by slowly turning the flower nail a ribbon, which I'm then going to turn the angle of the bag and bring it down to the cone. It can be brought down to the bottom of the cone if you like, or not, depending on what you prefer. So I've started and I've made this really nice little loop. Okay. Then I'm going to come slightly away from where I've finished that petal and pipe again. Fat end embeds itself, so make contact with the buttercream. That's the best way I find of being able to get this to hold. And then you pipe another ribbon and come down. So you're almost starting here and you're turning and come down. Okay, that gives you the bulk at the bottom and keeps this nice and interesting at the top. Come away from that finished end so that each one of these is kind of interlaced. They're not behind. So again, I've started here, pipe the ribbon, come down a little way away from the edge and do the same again. So you can see we're starting to build up a bit of a bud shape. And you just keep going, okay? building up the petals. I'm going to show this a couple of times anyway. And this is going to make a large-ish rose. I don't like the really big ones. I find them quite challenging to make. But if you notice, the movement on my piping tip is always this, a rainbow, an arc. Okay, and or you keep turning as you're piping, so the nail is being turned. And you build up your petals. Okay, so you're starting to get the makings of a rose. Now, my voice tells me to stop, and sometimes I just wish that I have stopped, because the more petals you put on, the more wobbly it gets and the messier it gets in my mind as well. So we're just going to finish this one off too. When I look at it, I'm thinking I want one more petal here, and then I'm going to stop. So just there. And now I want another one. Do you know what I mean? You can just never know when to stop. I'm going to stop there. Okay. Once you've made your rose, just set it on your tray, ready to go in the freezer. I'm going to do one right-handed. I'm just going to go and grab my cone. Okay, so I'll do one right-handed for you. Put a little bit of glue on the end on your piping nail. Plump up the bag so all the buttercream's down to the end and it's nice and tight. Attach your piping nail, your cone to the piping nail, and then we're ready to go. So fat end is wedged into the lower part of your cone. Use the angle of your piping tip to match the angle of the side of your cone. Fat end in, squeeze to make contact, a little gentle squeeze, and then go all the way around and come off sideways. So you've got just a little small rounded center. Then you come just short of where you came off to create your next petal. Okay. Now, if you don't go all the way down to the bottom of the cone, you end up with more of a bud, which is absolutely fine. So this one is going to be just a little bud. Okay, so I've just got 3 petals on there. And normally what I do is I take a look at it and I think, oh, I like it like that. So that's how I leave it. Now, I've got all this excess around here, but I'm not even going to chop that off. I could, if I wanted to, take my scissors and cut it off there, and even use my scissors to help me transfer it onto the cake. But what I want is something that's going to be a little bit lifted, so that when I put it into the arrangement, I've got some height to my arrangement. So at the moment, I'm just going to leave that on there. Okay, so this one will be my little bud. All right, so have a little go, and I'm going to get some more cones out and practice with you. And if you want, you can watch me do the next one. Slightly, we'll make a bigger rose. Okay, so make sure your bag is properly plumped up so that you haven't got a lot of pressure, because it's very difficult as you work if you've got a weaker bag. Lodge the fat end of the piping tip into your created cone, and then pipe the first center petal, which is going to be a closed up loop. Okay, this one's a bit wibbly. Being left-handed, it's very difficult to demonstrate right-handed, but I'm doing my best. So each time we're going to pipe a bit of a rainbow shape, and the new petals will come just short of where you've finished the petal before, just so that you've got this kind of brickwork overlapping rather than behind. So that's quite a closed up little rose. And then now I can just turn. If you turn your piping tip more so that the narrow end is facing the ceiling, it will open up the petal a little bit more. Less ranunculus, more rose. Keep all your petals, if you can, at the same height, and that makes it look less less like a ranunculus and more like a proper rose. Okay, so now we're starting to build up the outer petals. Okay, it's that arc, that rainbow piped shape. One more in there, and then I'm going to stop because I'm finding it quite difficult with my right hand. Okay, so we've got a little rose. Has anyone got any questions? Oh, okay, so I've forgotten to press record, so we'll just talk about this. So I've just a little squeeze to get teardrops out. We'll put one more on there. Okay, so all my flowers are here, and I'm going to start off by, I'm going to leave a gap in the middle where the roses are going to go, and I'm going to put in my the larger of the flower designs. So maybe 2 here. You can have them overlapping. Now, once you get these out of the freezer, you would work quite quickly. That's why I've piped the mound already, so that I've got it ready to go, sort of thing. I've got another one, little flower, push that on here. And then if I wanted to, I could put another one here. Why not? Let's go for it. So you can pop another one on there to overlap. So you've got something like this going on. Okay. Yeah. And then I will have a look to see where I want my smaller flowers, and the smaller flowers are more likely to be concentrated towards the end. So I like to work from the big flowers out to the medium, out to the small, and then I've got smaller ones to go on if which are just going to go on directly. So I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Just make sure you've got a little bit of glue. They're already struggling, so we're just going to quickly peel those off and stick them on. So overlapping is good because it gives it some interest as well. Okay, now we can take our favorite roses. So pick your favorite small rose, or sorry, full rose. This one's only just set, so it's a bit on the slushy side. We'll get that one popped into place. And then I've got a little bud here. Again, I haven't trimmed the cone part at the bottom. You can do if you feel like it's going to be too high. Pop that in. And I've got another little bud, again with the cone not chopped, and I'm going to pop that in here like so. This one's very soft, so I can't move it. So now you've got all your blossoms and your roses on. It's time to do the leaves. And the way I pipe the leaves, I'll just show you briefly how they're actually piped with that before I put it onto the plaque. We'll take this number 1218 off, and I'm going to replace it with my leaf tip. Now, if you haven't come across the leaf tip before, there's a couple of rules with this one. This is my all-time favorite piping tip. So again, scooch the bag, give it a good twist so you've got the tension and you're not going to hurt your wrist. The rule is that the beaker's got to be on the side, okay? The side, and the tip, the bottom beak tip, is touching the surface, and we've got a 45-degree angle on the bag. So you squeeze to build the width of the leaf, and then you relax the pressure but still carry on squeezing as you come off upwards. So you can either squeeze and draw along the surface and it'll give you a flat leaf, or you can squeeze and come up at an angle and that will give you a raised leaf. I'll show you a bit more about how that looks on the plaque in a moment. You can also do small ones and big ones. You can pipe and move, so you get fern-like ones. And if you squeeze and you judder really quickly but into and out of the leaf, you'll get lovely texture as well. So that's just using one leaf tip. You can use a smaller one if you want to, but this will do a lot. So I'm going to start by piping some big juddery leaves. So these kind of, they don't quite represent the rose leaf, but the idea is that they go with the roses. So we start, squeeze, and I'm pushing in and coming out, in, out, in, out. So I get this lovely kind of ruffle look. And I'm going to put one in here and another one in here. And then I can go in the back here. So I've got bigger ones to kind of frame the background. Okay, now I've just got to set this down so that I can actually work around the board for you to see, so you can see. So there'll be little ones coming in. Smaller ones, maybe a bit bigger, but not as big as the rose. So it makes it look like it's got more than one type of foliage in. So all the gaps, or wherever you feel like you want to put a leaf, you can do so. I've got a gap in here. So I'm going to carefully get my nozzle in there and squeeze quite firmly because I want a big-ish leaf to come out of there. And then I feel like I want to give a couple of big ones, maybe 2 on that side and 1 on that side. So you don't have to put too many on, but you kind of want to make the whole arrangement feel a bit balanced. So now we work on the other side. So we can start off with some small leaves. And it's entirely up to you how you create this, but bearing in mind you would have maybe done the flowers a little bit in advance, you can see how quickly something like this comes together. So I've got a big gap here where there was a bit of a blob for my mount, which I now need to fill in. So I'm just going to go in there with a couple of decent sized leaves. If I turn this profile, you can see that what I've managed to achieve is flat, raised, 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 lower, 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 lower. So it just gives it some 3D-ness, if that makes sense. You see the height in the middle is quite high. And then finally, and I'm here to help anyone who wants my help with the rose or how to assemble, I'm here, okay? But I'm just going to show you. This one is that specialist tip, and I'd be interested because one of you had a different type of tip, so I want to see how that works. The idea on this one is it's got a closed center in it, okay? It's got a little dot in the middle, and if you place that and touch the surface 90 degrees, but then squeeze, relax your pressure and come away, you'll see that you get a tiny, tiny little punched blossom. So these ones you can't peel off because all the petals are separated, so they're done in situ, and they would look fantastic on cupcakes. So you can see if I just put a couple of those, and then we could do the same on this side. Maybe one more here. I feel like I want to put one there. Okay, so we've got little punch blossoms there. I'm going to go back and give myself just 1 or 2 more tiny leaves. Again, just using the 352 is more than adequate, but if you want to, it's not wanting to stick. Okay, and very, very, very last, I'm going to put a little white center through in those little punch blossoms. These punch blossoms, if you think of something like Veronica, or lilac, something like that, you could actually pipe a sausage or a flat cone of buttercream, let it set, and then you could go ahead and punch these flowers all over it, put centers in them, and you'd have the most spectacular kind of elongated large flower. So here is just white with the number 2, and I'm just going in to finish off. And essentially, that is your arrangement. Okay.
That's beautiful, Hannah.
It's amazing how it all comes together from what looks like nothing.
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
Hannah, what number was your punched flowers?
The punch flower was a 224.
Yeah, 224.
A Wilton 224.
Yeah.
A 2D is too big, is it?
A 2D will give you the same, but it will come out large. So if you were doing a 2D, you'd probably want to fit it in instead of these.
Oh, I see.
It comes out medium size, the 2D, because it is big, but it is the same thing. You can you actually physically touch the surface with the middle of the piping tip
Right.
and hold it vertically and then pipe.
Wow.
Okay, so this is the finished version. You can see all completed. And just for your interest, really, the same thing can be created in royal icing. So this is royal icing. I would have piped all of this together and let it dry. So we've got a big chunk here. It's actually, I would have then subsequently, once it's on the cake, piped in the leaves and the blossoms on the end because they're a little bit more fragile. Okay, so you can do this all in royal icing. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.